Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic to have you here again for the second part of our World Otter Day webinar series. For those that have been before over the previous years, you'll know that we run two sort of webinars across the day. The morning webinar, we kind of focus on European otters and Asian otter conservation work, and then the afternoon we try and focus on the Americas and Africa, and that is no different this year, where we are joined by four, amazing speakers from two from Africa and two from the Americas, and we are so delighted to have them here. It's also great to see many of you returning from this morning. Lottie, Dennis, Jane again. I'm sure there's others as well. Those are just the names that I'm picking up, glancing down. It's also amazing to see that Graham and Andreas, two of our speakers from this morning, have also joined us this afternoon to learn from a couple of other otter conservation work. So thank you again to those two speakers from this morning for their amazing presentations. And we are moving on to the afternoon session with four new speakers. For those who are joining us for the first time, this is the 10th anniversary of World Otter Day. IOSF launched World Otter Day 10 years ago, obviously in 2016, to kind of help put otters on the map, raise awareness of their conservation, the needs of their conservation, basically to help the world celebrate otters. And each year it's grown from success to success. And this year we have events in over 50 countries. I think it was 51 at last count, 51, which is absolutely amazing considering how many countries there are in the world. It's about a quarter of the countries in the world are involved, and we're really proud of that. And hopefully each year we can keep growing it, and more importantly, keep growing the awareness of otter conservation globally. It's with great pleasure that we invite you here today. We had over 270 people sign up across the two webinars from 42 different countries at last count, which is absolutely unbelievable. I think it's the most countries we've had through our 6 years of doing these. So we're really overwhelmed that not only are you all celebrating World Otter Day, you're choosing to celebrate it with us. We're also totally indebted to the 8 speakers that we have today, and we can't thank them enough for their time, their expertise, and possibly more importantly, the work they are doing on a day-to-day basis with otters in their respective areas. Um, uh, just a bit of housekeeping for anyone that is here for the first time. The presentations today, the whole webinar is obviously on Zoom, but it's in the webinar format. So the only people that can share their screen can talk, and you'll be able to see are myself and the 4 speakers, who I will introduce shortly. If you do have any questions, and please don't be shy in putting your questions forward to the speakers. Then use the chat boxes and the questions and answers boxes, and I will relay them back, and we can have an open conversation about their work, about otters in their respective countries, and anything else. Also, if you have any questions for myself, I'll be happy to answer them with that moving forward. As I said, we have 42 countries represented through the attendees and through the speakers. So it really is a global and World Otter Day experience and webinar that we're holding today. So we're so proud of it, and we're really, really pleased to have you all here today. For this afternoon session, as I said, we kind of focus on the Americas and Africa, and we have split it well 2 of each. So we have the following presentations, and again, I'd like to express my greatest gratitude and thanks to the 4 speakers for their time. We have, and Marcelo, please, we have Marcelo Augusto, who is going to talk about the study of the behavior, habitat niche of the neotropical otter, individuals on Santa Catarina Island in Florianópolis, Brazil. Thank you, Marcelo. We have Gonzalo Medina Vogel, who is not actually, he'll be joining us a little bit later. He has a couple of other presentations, who's going to be talking about saving the southern river otter, the next steps in Chile. We have Issa Daoud, who is going to talk the Eurasian otter in Morocco, an overlooked population on the edge of its range. and we have Trevor McIntyre, who is going to talk about otters in South Africa. We are absolutely delighted to have you here today. Thank you so much again for your time and for your efforts with us and putting together the presentations and for taking the time out of your day, which I'm sure is pretty busy, to come and join us for the next couple of hours. We couldn't be happier with our selected speakers, and thank you so much. So, without further ado, I'll pass you over to the first of our speakers, who is joining us from South Africa. I will give a brief introduction to Trevor, and then Trevor, I will hand over to you. Just going to give an introduction using the bio that you have sent. So, Trevor McIntyre, Professor of Zoology at the University of Johannesburg, brings a wealth of expertise in animal behaviour and ecology. While his research has taken him to the Antarctic and subantarctic to study seals, his recent work shines a spotlight much closer to home, focusing on the ecology and conservation of African clawless otters across southern Africa. Over the past decade, Trevor has led and supervised projects exploring otter diet, population parameters, stress, human-otter conflict, interactions with commercial fishing operations. He also plays a key role in global conservation as a species coordinator for the African clawless otter with the IUCN Specialist Group. Trevor, again, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to give a presentation. Let me just quickly share my screen here, and it should work. Let me know if there are any issues. Hopefully, there we go. So I'm not too sure if anyone is joining here who may have seen parts of this presentation before. If so, I do apologize. I have parts of this presentation I have presented previously at one of the IOSF, the Otter Specialist Group meetings, as well as locally for one of the conservation groups within Southern Africa. But yeah, so what I'd like to do is just give you a bit of a brief background, largely on some of the work that my students, more so than me directly, have been doing over the past few years, related to otters in South Africa and neighboring countries. And then yeah, sort of highlight some of the issues that we're facing, some of the things that we potentially would like to explore moving forward. So just a brief outline. I'm going to give you just a quick background on some of the more recently published work on otters, which will hopefully illustrate to you how little has been done and how far we have to go, particularly in comparison with otters in Europe. So if you compare it to numbers of papers and things in other parts of the world, we generally in Africa we are a long way behind. And then I'm going to quickly run through just a couple of the aspects that students of mine have been working on over the past few years, as I mentioned. Okay, so firstly, just if any of you are unsure, just to give you a quick background of the species that are present within, at least for my purposes, I'm focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, so otters that occur south of the Sahara. We have 3 endemic species: the African clawless otter, the Congo clawless otter, and the spotted-necked otter. This lighter pinkish shading is the distribution of the African clawless otter that you can see it's very widely distributed. It really occurs almost anywhere where there is fresh water, with the only exception being this Congo Basin area where it's replaced by the Congo clawless otter. And then the spotted-necked otter has a bit more of a patchy distribution, but also being quite widely distributed, which is this sort of darker shading. And you can see it overlaps in many areas, particularly with the distribution of African clawless otters. So there's been quite a lot of work sort of focusing on the sympatric occurrence of the 2 species, where we know the diets overlap in many places. What we don't know is we don't know if there's any competition between the species, whether that has any influence really on how we should be thinking about the systems that they occur in. Yeah, but all 3 species are of some conservation concern. They're currently listed as near threatened. What's really important though is many of these listings are based on actually very little data currently. It's a best guess effort at the moment. Particularly for species like the Congo clawless otter, where there, as you'll see in a moment, that where there's been very little work done, and we know actually very little about their distribution. We know little about their abundance. We even threats to their persistence in the systems that they occur in are really understudied. So there's in many ways the these sort of classifications are potentially I wouldn't call it misleading, but there is the possibility that many of these threat classifications should actually be upgraded, as you'll see in a second. Okay, so just to give you a quick idea, this is just an overview. What I've done is a couple of years ago, I did a quick survey of published papers on otters within sub-Saharan Africa, and sort of plotted the locations of those studies across the map. And what you can see here is that this number is a little bit outdated. In the last year or so, there've been a few papers added, but up until about a year or two ago, for the previous sort of decade and a little bit more, there have been only 35 papers published related to otters within sort of sub-Saharan Africa. And what you can see clearly is there's sort of this clustering in South Africa where there's been a lot more work done. And then there's sort of scattered little bits of papers that have shown up across the board in other countries. If you break it down to African clawless otters specifically, you'll notice again this clustering within South Africa. But what's interesting is if you break it into the specific sort of topics that were dealt with in these papers, many of them were sort of relatively indirect in the sense of relying or papers that have resulted from surveys on sign, work done on fecal analyses, and then some more social science type work related to interviews with people about conflict and about issues around their occurrence in systems. But again, you see this sort of spatial clustering with big gaps where there's very little that has been sort of published, at least in peer-reviewed literature. Similarly, for spotted-necked otters, there have been fewer papers over the last decade. The distribution of these papers are a little bit more, or a little bit better at least. And then what's really, really important, I'm going to skip through this, get into the meat of what I'm talking about later. But what's really, really important is if we look at Congo clawless otters, there's been really two published accounts in peer-reviewed literature. Now, if you go on something on a platform like iNaturalist or something similar, you'll see that there are a few more distribution records that have been forthcoming over the past few years. Some of them are a little bit more reliable than others. Some of them are actual photographic evidence. Some of them are based on sign, where in areas particularly where they potentially co-occur with African clawless otters, the species identification is a little bit questionable, and I think there's just this sort of this dearth of knowledge, and what you can see here is these are papers. I believe, if I remember correctly, one of these papers was based on a single camera trap record of a single otter, and so we know actually very, very little about what's going on in this area. What are the threats to Congo clawless otters? What are the environmental changes happening there? And what is the status? We simply don't know. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just focus a little bit on some of the work that we've been doing more locally. And as you'll see as I go through, I'm going to just highlight sort of individual students who've largely been driving these projects. As Ben mentioned, I sort of am still involved with a number of other research projects, and much of the otter work has therefore been student driven completely. I've helped to get the projects a little bit off the ground, but much of the data collection and the actual write-ups and the analyses of data have been from students that I've been lucky enough to supervise. So some of the first work that we started doing was looking at the sort of trophic level diet of African clawless otters in different environments. And this work was done by a former student of mine, Rowan Jordan, who's pictured in the top right-hand corner. And one of the cool things that he did was for his study, for his master's work, was he used stable isotope ratios to infer diets and localities of foraging behavior from African clawless otters. So the tissue type specifically that he used were whiskers. And what happens, so the cool thing about whiskers is they provide a time series of stable isotope ratios. Now, I'm not going to go into details. If you're not familiar with the approach of using stable isotope ratios, it's not really important for the purposes of this talk. The point of it is that these ratios of nitrogen and carbon, specifically nitrogen 15 and carbon 13, are commonly used in ecological work to estimate a trophic level diet. And if you know something about what the stable isotope ratios of potential prey items are within a system, and also further down in the trophic level, so also the producers in the system, then you can start saying something about where your animal of interest sort of fits within that system and what it has likely been foraging on. So what whisker samples do is they form basically this time series. Because it's an inert tissue type, as it grows, as it keeps growing, basically gives you a little bit of a timestamp of, at this point in time, the animal was foraging on X, and as it grows, it gives you a next timestamp of it was foraging on Y. And what Rowan was able to do was take a couple of whisker samples from otters and have a look at what these stable isotope ratios patterns are like. And what you'll notice here is if we focus on the blue lines, these nitrogen 15 lines, these are an indication of that trophic level diet per se. And what you'll see for some individuals, this was very stable. So if you move from the base of the whisker right to the tip basically being representative of the oldest material, so you're moving back in time, with this being the most recent. And what you'll see is the diet of this individual here was super stable, almost what you would call a specialized form of diet, where it was really foraging on a single prey type, at least over an extended period of time. And if you compare it to other individuals like this one, you can see that there's a lot of variation, where this animal is clearly foraging on something very different for a period of time in the middle, and then something in a different sort of trophic level either side of that. And then there's also variation in terms of sort of the trophic level within which animals are foraging, with some foraging at a lower level than others. Now, if you build that into a couple of models, you can start making some assumptions or make some guesses around what prey items these animals were foraging on. And what was interesting was, at least for animals sampled around areas where there are commercially stocked prey available, so trout specifically, which are stocked in South Africa for fly fishing purposes, we found that African clawless otters clearly were able to take advantage of this. Now, African clawless otters are thought to be more generally more crab specialist foragers. So this was not it wasn't a surprise, but it was a good way of showing that they were actually capable of taking trout, even in systems where trout are sort of able to move, and would be potentially quite difficult to catch. And so what this work sort of led to then was a next sort of a follow-up study by another student of mine, Marie de Vos. What we noticed on some of these trout fishing estates was that the owners and the managers were also starting to show some concern around losses, stock losses that were potentially attributable to otters. Now, importantly, these systems also have other predators. They have avian predators, so they have cormorants, they have fish eagles, and they don't know necessarily what loss they are experiencing from other potential sources. So What Marie tried to do as part of her study was try and get an idea of how big is this actual problem. Are otters really responsible for these sort of losses that they are estimating, or were there potential other drivers in these systems? So what she did was the first part of her experiment that she tried to do was she did a mark recapture study on the trout being stocked. So what you see in that image here is she's inserting a little transponder, basically a little microchip, into a fish that's being stocked into a new system. And the hope was that we would be able to find those transponders in otter latrines if the otters had been predating on the trout that were going into the systems. Now, that part of the study didn't work for some reason. We're still not really sure why, but those transponders just didn't show up in the latrines at all. It is very possible that they either broke in the process or that, I don't know, somehow we were missing latrines. I'm not too sure exactly what happened, but ultimately this part of the project didn't work. But she was still able to continue with a mark recapture component because the anglers were, as they were bringing in fish, she was scanning them, and most of those were being returned into the system again. So there's this continual recapture effort, and that she could then build into models and estimate what the survivorship was of trout within these systems. And she was able to show that survivorship was dependent on the size of the individual systems. The larger the dam, the longer animals were able to survive. In smaller systems, in weirs and small dams, they simply didn't last very long. And this coincided with observations of where the otters were present. She did a lot of observational work and checked and did visual observations, basically sitting next to different systems at various times of day. And in those systems, particularly spotted-necked otters as well as African clawless otters were regularly seen in the smaller systems, not the larger systems. So there's sort of this causal or this potential causal relationship there. But what's really important was she also did a bunch of interviews with stakeholders, with managers of various systems across the country. And what was concerning was that a large proportion, more than half of them, admitted to employing fatal shooting as a means of controlling otters in these systems. And this is illegal in South Africa. They are a species that you are not allowed to hunt without a special permit. But nonetheless, this is a commonly used management approach as such. So whether this is effective or not, we're not sure, but this led to a number of other questions. So we know that there is a big problem here ultimately is what came out from this. What followed from this was another student of mine, Tepi Majalantle. She undertook a project, again, focusing on some of these trout estates, which were modified systems, human modified systems, and comparing them with localized systems to try and get an idea of what the abundance, what the actual density, population densities of otters were in these systems and how they compared with natural ones. And so this was a camera trap based study, and she developed an approach using random encounter models. Again, if you're not sort of familiar with camera trapping work, it's not important to know the details. You're more than welcome to write to me afterwards, or we can chat later and I can explain to you in more detail. But basically, the idea is if you use a whole bunch of camera traps and you are able to get an idea of how many encounters you're getting with otters over a period of time, and you know something about how fast they're moving. We've done a little bit of tracking work on the side. Then you can start estimating how many animals there are likely to be for a given area based on a big effort, at least from a camera trapping perspective. And what she was able to show was this Millstream farm. This is the trout estate over here, compared to a natural area that was nearby and another natural area which is further away, had a far higher density of African clawless otters, at least compared to the other two. So she was able to show, yes, so we know that they predate on trout, and yes, we know that there are lots more on these systems, or at least on these properties compared to natural areas. She then also started having a look at some of the stress hormones that one can measure from fecal matter. So what these hormones is basically metabolites of hormones that one is able to pick up from fresh fecal material. And that can give you some idea of at least the population level indicator of stress. One can also use other hormones to determine sexes of individuals that produce samples. But for this study, she was focusing on stress hormones. And what she was able to show here again was again in this transformed area, Millstream Farm, compared to natural areas, there was a lot higher or much higher concentrations of these fecal glucocorticoids, which are an indicator of elevated stress. What causes that stress, we don't know. Whether it is something like disease, whether it is something like simply a higher population density of otters. Potentially there's, from a social perspective, that creates a lot of conflict. We don't really know what the causes of that is. Causes of that are at least. So again, this was sort of setting a baseline for a lot of work that followed again. So one of the interesting things that this allowed for, this work was done in 2018. And what happened subsequent to that was the managers of specifically Millstream Farm came to me again over the course of the years that followed and indicated that they continued to have issues with stock losses, and they don't really know what to do. They don't know what methods they can approach. And more recently, what also started happening was they had anglers complaining about otters chasing them out of the water, where you have direct conflict with otters that were seemingly becoming aggressive towards anglers. So what I did was last year in 2025, I did a follow-up survey, and I basically repeated Tepi's survey approach with camera traps to try and get an idea of whether this problem, which was a problem in 2018 already, is getting worse in terms of the numbers of otters that are available, that are actually using the system, and whether that population density or abundance at least is increasing. And so one of the things, sorry, I forgot I was going to mention this before. And one of the other things that sort of became clear before I did my follow-up was another study by Marli Berger, who is a student at the University of Pretoria, showed that the diets of otters at Millstream Farm had a big seasonal sort of signal. But what was really interesting was in the dry winter months, that fish dominated their diet. And this was a change from the previous work from Rowan Jordan, where he showed that most of the diet remained to be crab-based sort of throughout the year. And her work showed that, at least in the dry season, that these otters are seemingly focusing a lot more on trout. So this sort of started giving a couple of clues about what potentially is going on there. But when I did my re-survey, then the camera trapping based survey, these are sort of the rough outputs. This is just what you see here as a relative abundance index. The numbers are not important. It's just for purposes of comparison. And what you see here is in 2018, this relative abundance index for African clawless otters was higher than what it was in 2025. Similarly, for spotted-necked otters, there was this little bit of a drop in numbers, seemingly, for the two otter species. Interestingly, the marsh mongoose, which is not known to predate on trout, numbers were a lot more stable, at least between the two survey periods. And what this seems to suggest is that the problem may be getting worse, but certainly it is not because there are more otters. And this leads to another number of questions. My leading hypothesis being that there's potentially fewer crabs available in the dry seasons. The farmers have also reported that there's less damage over the past few years to some of the weirs and dam walls that can be attributed to crabs. And what's happening now is potentially that these otters are simply specializing. The dietary specialization is kicking in. They're focusing in on trout, and seemingly quite successfully so. So it's not a numbers issue, and potentially, the concerns about numbers of otters increasing is at least not the cause of the problems. Nonetheless, we don't really have a solution yet, so I'm happy to listen to potential suggestions after this talk. Okay, so I'm going to move on just to a couple of other projects that students have been involved with. I had another student, Stephanie Nicolaides, pictured in the top right, who had a look at particularly latrine site selection and potential roles of latrines in terms of behavior and interactions within the species. What she was able to show, at least at a micro scale, that otters were clearly selecting areas that were prone to lower wind activity, but yet in open and particularly more flat areas. What this plot just shows you, this is a probability of occurrence of a latrine site, and the highest sort of occurrence is here where the slope of the ground is lowest. So this is quite flat. This is -1 standard deviation on the model, and the wind speed is quite low. And this is sort of the areas that otters were seemingly targeting. And this sort of leads into questions around why they're picking these areas. Is it because clearly if they're avoiding areas that have a lot of wind, they're potentially not interested in distributing the scent, and they're potentially rather interested in preserving the scent in the area. And these flatter areas, but the flatter areas typically are, again, a little bit more visible, though, potentially to other otters and potentially also to other animals. What she also did was she had a look at the chemical composition of these spraint sites. And what this showed was, you don't need to read the whole table, but most of the identified compounds that she was able to pick out from these latrines have previously been shown to be associated with sexual advertising and sexual differentiation for other animals, at least where it's been studied in more detail. So this seems to suggest that the latrines for at least for African clawless otters potentially play a major role in terms of advertising, perhaps reproductive capacity, or at least estrus or sexuality between individuals within a system, and potentially less so as a means to avoid conflict or even communication with other species, as far as we can tell. A further study from another student of mine, Candice Lewis, what she did was she used camera trap data from multiple sites across Southern Africa. These are all in protected areas. And what she did was she used similar approaches to determine the population densities as well as the activity patterns of otters within these systems. What you see here is just a plot of activity patterns, and what you see is basically this line gives you an idea of what time of day otters were more active. For most areas, you see this typical nocturnal / dawn and dusk periods with little activity in the middle of the day. But what's interesting is in some areas, some protected areas, animals were far more active in the middle of the day than in others. We don't really know what the cause of this is. If we compare it with some of the disturbed areas, we know in the disturbed areas that they show a very clear nocturnal signature where daytime activity is extremely limited. But in some of the protected areas, at least, we can show that they certainly seem to be a little bit more flexible in terms of their activity patterns. But the most important result from her work is that the population density estimates that she was able to calculate for these different areas ultimately show that the densities, the population densities are far lower than what we have previously thought them to be based on sign-based surveys. So what you see here, don't worry too much about all the detail in this table. I know it's a lot. But if you look at the encircled values, these are the numbers of kilometers of a river front that is modeled to be required for one otter to be in a system. So what you can see here from her work, and her work is all the highlighted red lines here. For many of these systems, you get very long stretches of river. 15 kilometers of a river is required to support one otter in this study from Talpirion, which is a protected area in Mpumalanga province in South Africa. But previous surveys based on sign, based on the presence of latrines and spoor and other and halts, have suggested this sort of to be far lower, that you only need about 2 or 3 kilometers of river frontage before you to support a single otter. So this is concerning. This is one of the major reasons why I think we potentially need a lot more work to try and get an idea of what the actual population status and sizes are of individuals. I think I'm running a little bit over time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. We've also done more modeling and surveys in other areas. This is another student from Namibia, Lena. And what was interesting here was in the Okavango system in the northern parts of Namibia, we found very, very, very few otters. And similarly, we've got a similar result for parts of Northern Kruger National Park. And one of the things we suspect here is that this could be an association with crocodiles. These are the only 2 areas where there are large crocodile populations compared to the other sites that we've been surveying. And this is a question mark, but this is something that we need to explore further going forward. Okay, one of the last things that I just quickly want to highlight, a current student of mine, Esther Howard. She's working a little bit on otters in urban environments. I'm going to start playing just 2 little clips here, just for that you can start having a look at what's happening around Cape Town and surrounding areas. I think this one wants to play sound. I'm going to avoid that. But what you'll notice here, these are just 2 clips that sort of has been circulating on social media of otters interacting with humans and dogs in urban areas around Cape Town. This has been an increasingly prevalent phenomenon, particularly since COVID and lockdown associated periods where there were fewer people around. And subsequent to that, there have been otters that have been moving into these urban areas and doing quite well, seemingly, but also leading to a number of incidents where there is conflict and the potential for major conflict between otters and people and pets. So what Esther is currently doing is she's having a look at activity periods, stress levels from fecal hormones, as well as diet between otters in urban environments and comparing that to natural environments. So trying to get an idea of what really are the adaptations that otters are undergoing in order to exploit these urban environments, at least in the Cape Town area. So I'm going to end it there. With that, I'd just like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Trevor. Fascinating and well articulated. Thank you so much for your presentation. You actually interestingly covered a lot of sort of half of the topics that we were talking about this morning. I'm not sure if you were on this morning's webinar, but we had a discussion. As Trevor said, sorry, if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or question and answers box, and I'll ask them when I'm ready. Yeah, we had Andreas Krantz from Austria, who was basically talking about the Eurasian otter and interactions with trout farmers, and how Austria is now having some culls of otters. You mentioned that it is illegal to kill the African claws and spotted necked otter. I'm assuming both of them in South Africa. Is it something that firstly is well policed by the authorities, and is it something that potentially they would look to do something unfortunately similar to Austria, where they could potentially want permits to these sort of people to kill otters?
So it's not policed. It's hardly policed at all, I'm afraid. So there are estates where you can drive in and you can find otter pelts being hung out to dry visibly to the public. So no, there's no real enforcement of the laws, I'm afraid, in that context. I know of a few estates that are interested in trying to test out relocation efforts. It's not something that I'm encouraging from my end. I don't think it's a long-term solution, and I suspect that I certainly suspect that the numbers of otters, based on our work partly, are not changing on these systems. It's not, if you move otters out, you're likely to get others coming in, and they'll naturally reach some sort of plateau based on the availability of food. I think
Yeah.
the best bet is to try and increase the availability of alternative prey in these systems. To that will possibly mitigate some of the losses, but other than that, it's it's a bit of a tough situation, I'm afraid. I
Yeah.
mean, look, I mean, it's probably yes, there will. I'm sure there are, and there will be applications to legally hunt otters on some of these farms. I doubt they'll be granted easily, but I don't think that's stopping them. I'm afraid.
Yeah, I understand that. And when you were talking about how there was a high abundance in the trout farms and that fish weren't necessarily the African claw's normal diet, I immediately thought that maybe it was because there was a lack of their natural prey, which you brought up. So it might be a case that like there might be a reason, there might be water quality issues that are leading to the crabs and their usual prey, and they're
Mm,
almost out of desperation going to find something else and have found something else.
mm. Yeah, look, I mean, I suspect look, the densities of otters are certainly higher than a natural sort of background level. And I suspect what's potentially happening, it could be a water quality issue, but it's potentially also just they've hammered the the crabs already. And that
Yeah,
high otter density is leading to a crash in crab population density, availability at least.
yeah,
Um, and so then they're going to switch to chart.
yeah.
That's natural. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a few questions for you. Elsa has said, "Hello, thanks for your very interesting presentation. Could you please tell me more about why the isotopes N/C report of the whiskers reflect diet stability?"
Sure. So the nitrogen specifically is the one that we normally use for a diet indication. Basically, what you'll expect to see if an animal is feeding on the same thing throughout, then if you plot those values next to one another, I'll quickly maybe just scroll back to that slide. Um, the so those examples. So this one here. If you this one is sort of what I would classify typically as a dietary specialist, or at least where the diet is very stable over time. What these values basically tell you is within a trophic level system, if you sample different prey items, you each get a unique um, isotopic signature, and that you can put into a model over time to give you an idea of where your animal is feeding, whether it's feeding on something lower down in the trophic system or higher up. And what basically the straight line means is if this value is sitting around 14, there are only one or two prey items within a system that can result in a value of 14 of for nitrogen 15 at least. So whereas if you compare it to this animal here, where the values vary between 16 down to 14 to 13, 12, back up to 18 almost. This seems to suggest that an animal has been foraging on a range of prey items over time, where initially for a while it was, at least this would be back in time, this would be the tip of the whisker. Initially, it was foraging at a relatively high trophic level on something that itself is not a producer or low down in trophic level. So probably something like trout, where trout would be feeding on something that have on other smaller fish or feed that they're being fed in the systems. Whereas these lower down values would be more representative of something like crabs, where crabs are just sort of filter feeders and feeding on small detritus in the system. I hope that helps to clarify the question.
Yeah, Elsa and Andreas both asked the same question of how did Rowan get the whiskers?
Yeah. So this is part of another study we were doing. We were trying to do some tracking work. So he captured a few individuals in a number of systems, and we tried out a few satellite tags. Not actually, no, those weren't satellite tags. Those were just VHF tags. The tracking work was semi-successful. We were able to follow a few around for a while, but during the capture, while the animals were restrained and fitted with with tags, we sampled whiskers. So basically, take a whisker and you just cut it off as close to the face as possible. So a single whisker either side, and that would be what we used.
Okay. Um, Nicholas has asked, what was the nature of the collaboration between otters and crocodiles? I'm assuming it's
Yeah, so that's all we don't know. I mean, this is sort of speculation at this point. I mean, all that we've noticed is, at least from a camera trapping based survey perspective, um, there are otters present in systems where there are lots of crocodiles, but they're certainly not as abundant as they are in systems without crocodiles. Now, what I'm wondering myself about is I crocodiles are the only real natural predator that would take that would likely take otters occasionally. But I don't, not that otters make up a major prey item for crocodiles in any case. So it would be, what I suspect is happening is otters are likely avoiding areas with high crocodile densities ultimately. That it's not a case of they're being predated and killed in these systems, but they're simply just not using them as much as areas where there are fewer crocodiles. That's my hypothesis, but we're yet to test it. We don't actually know what's going on.
I mean, it makes sense about the crocodiles, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Uh, Graham says, really interesting talk. I was in Cape Town in February and witnessed possibly those two otters in the city park by the new stadium, and also in a ditch on the adjacent golf course. Many people seem to have seen them, and definitely aggressive responses to people walking dogs. Kind of following on from that, is there a likelihood that Cape Town could house or have resident otter populations in a similar way to what Singapore does?
It would be it would be really nice. I think it would require a lot of careful management and planning, and I think to a certain extent there have been a few incidents. I know at least of one incident where someone has been bitten by an otter, but most of the interactions have not resulted, at least, in any injuries. So, like the video clip I showed you, where they're really interested in the dogs of people, seem to be almost the norm, but that there haven't been any actual or very few aggressive interactions. And I think the general public are quite tolerant of them. I think, but like you saw in the second clip, if when they end up in traffic, it becomes a chaotic scene, and you have people scattering all over the place, and so I don't know. I suspect there's less incentive for a city like Cape Town to take the same measures as Singapore did to try and really keep people away and try and protect the otters within the system, because they're common just outside of Cape Town. You don't have to travel far to find otters in. If you just go around the corner into the False Bay area, there are lots of otters over there as well. So it's not like, from a species conservation point, that Cape Town is that important. So yeah, I doubt it, I'm afraid.
Yeah. A couple more questions. One from Lottie. She said, "Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, maybe I missed it, but do you use dead otters to look at the amount of toxic substances from the diet and possibly the effects of it?"
Not yet. No. I mean, that's one of the big gaps. Certainly compared, that's again one of those things that, compared to what has been done in Europe and in America, we haven't done any of that. We get far fewer carcasses compared to Europe. They're not commonly killed on roads, as there are in some of the European countries, as examples. So, but we do have, actually, there's a new student who is working at the veterinary school of the University of Pretoria, who is aiming to set up a bit of a registry and a means of collecting any carcasses that come through to the veterinary school. So there is some possibility of accessing some, but generally no. we haven't done anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. We have one final question, Trevor, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. And it is Andreas asking if you have any video records of otters chasing the anglers.
I don't personally. I should actually ask. I have seen somewhere a few years ago. I did see an interaction. This wasn't an angler. This was someone on a little kayak, but within also on one of these triad estates, where the interaction there was an otter that seemed to be, at least at face value, reasonably aggressive towards the kayak. But there was no direct interaction. It didn't bite the kayak. It was just there and sort of pushing a little bit against it, and then it left. But I haven't. I'm not aware of. I should actually ask. But I'm not aware of actual any footage, I'm afraid.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much. If anyone has any further questions for Trevor, please feel free to use the two boxes, as I mentioned, the chat and the questions and answers box, and we can ask him at the end. In the meantime, Trevor, really thankful to you for offering your expertise and telling us all about otters in South Africa. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks.
No problem. We are now going to pass over to our next speaker, and we will be staying in Africa, but this time going further north into Morocco. And we're going to hand over to Issa Daoud, and hopefully, Issa, I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and apologies if not, who's going to talk on the Eurasian otter in Morocco, an overlooked population at the edge of its range. And just to give a brief introduction to
Hello.
Issa. Hi, Issa.
Um,
Issa Daoud is a biology student from Morocco with a strong focus on wildlife conservation and particularly the Eurasian otter. His work centres on documenting otter presence, behaviour and conservation challenges in Moroccan rivers through field observations and camera trappings. Issa is passionate about raising awareness of this often overlooked population in North Africa and contributing to research and conservation efforts for the species in Morocco. Issa, I'll hand over to you, and once again, thank you for joining us today.
welcome. Just share my presentation.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Since hello everyone, I hope you can hear me well.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can see that as well. Thanks.
So my name is Issa Daoud, a biology student from Morocco. Today I'll be talking about the Eurasian otter in Morocco, focusing on its distribution, behavior, and some field observations that help us better understand how the species is adapting to different environments across the country. Before we move further, I think I will give a brief introduction about the species. Let's see. The Eurasian otter. It is known as, it's very famous. It is a carnivorous, a semi-aquatic carnivorous mammal. It's known for its strong swimming abilities. Can be found in Europe, Asia, parts of North Africa, as it's here in this map. Its diet is mainly composed of fish, but it can also have amphibians, crustaceans, rodents, and sometimes birds, depending on availability. So this presentation, it's more about like a collection of observations from Morocco in the past years, last year and the last before that. So let's move further. So the Eurasian otter in Morocco has a wide the Eurasian in Morocco is mainly associated with river systems. Available record shows a wide distribution, as shown here in the north, the Atlas Mountains, and parts in the east and west. However, it's important to mention that the map shown here is not an official distribution map, but rather an approximate representation based on available records. So the real distribution can be found can be broader than what is currently documented, especially in areas that are less studied or less surveyed. And this uncertainty is important because it means that our understanding is still incomplete. And when that's the case, even individual observations can become very valuable, especially when they give us insight into our production or long-term presence. This is one of the most important observations in this presentation. An otter family of 3 was recorded in the Meluia River through a trap camera. And this is not just a simple sighting, because it confirms that reproduction is taking place in Moroccan rivers. And that's important, because it means that the habitat is not just supporting survival, but also breeding. As known, otter cubs depend heavily on their mother, so the presence of a family group is a strong indicator of a stable and suitable habitat. But at the same time, not all environments in Morocco offer these stable conditions. And when we move further south, we start to see something different. These observations was reported in iNaturalist near Gomim. And after further research and discussions with local observers, it appears that the otter population in this area is associated with a permanent water source. Specifically, this corresponds to this river, the Noun River, which is considered the southernmost permanent watercourse in Morocco. So, despite being located in a arid region, this stable water availability likely supports the presence of otters in the area. This highlights how even in dry environments, localized permanent water sources can sustain key species. We've done another observation in Al-Rashidiyya, which is also an arid region. In this type of environment, water sources are often temporary and depend heavily on rainfall. The otter here is a Rashidiyya was observed feeding in a small pond where fish had become trapped as water levels decreased. You can see it clearly in this video. And interestingly, you can see it, it's the head of the fish. You can see it right below. This behavior may reflect an energy efficient strategy. So instead of random feeding, it may be making selective choices based on availability and effort. So at this point, we start to see something important. This is no longer just about presence or something. This is about adaptation. And this idea becomes even more evident when human activity comes. This otter was recorded eating a fish above the water level, right next to the fishing net. This suggests that the otter is not only aware of the net, but is actively using it as a feeding opportunity. This reflects a high level of behavioral flexibility and opportunism, but at the same time, it introduces risk, such as entanglement, injury, or conflict with fishermen. And what's interesting is that the interaction with humans is not limited to fishing areas or remote locations. Sometimes it happens much closer to where people actually live. This observation comes from my own field experience. The footage shows an otter trail with multiple footprints directly in front of a house along the riverbank. They suggest repeated use of the same path in a highly disturbed area. So the otter is not just passing once. It is actually using this this environment regularly. This indicates a certain level of tolerance to human presence, but it also raises questions about stress, risk, and long-term survival. So, to understand how this is possible, we need to look more closely at how otters behave and communicate in their environment. Eurasian otters are mostly nocturnal and territorial. They rely heavily on scent marking to communicate, including sprints. In areas where rocks are rare, they adapt by building sprints in mounds and depositing sprints on the head of these mounds, so they can be visible. And yeah, in some this as you can see here in this picture, this is quite a very bad situation in Morocco that we have here in Morocco. In some rural areas, there is an actual misidentification between the Eurasian otter and the Egyptian mongoose. During some field discussions with locals, when shown images of otters, many identified them as mongooses, and that's important because mongooses are associated with poultry predation, which creates a direct conflict with the locals. So in some cases, the otters may be killed, not because of their own behavior, but because they are mistaken for another species. This shows that the issue is not only ecological, but also strongly linked to a local perception. And it highlights the need for targeted awareness and to reduce this type of conflicts. And this type of interaction is actually part of a broader set of threats affecting the species. In Morocco, otters face several threats. These include water pollution, habitat degradation, reduced water availability, and increase in human disturbance. Unfortunately, they are all present in this picture. As you can see, the water is not in good form. There are some waste in the water, and you can see a home right next to the river. In addition, field observations suggest that misidentification with mongooses can lead to a direct conflict with local communities, and in some cases results in the killing of others, and that's sad. This highlights the importance of combining ecological conservation with community awareness and education. And one of the biggest challenges we face, like our students, the biggest challenge we face in trying to understand this impact is that we still don't have enough data. As you can see, there is an otter in the Rabat Zoo in Morocco. This is an captive otter. So there is a clear lack of structured research on the Eurasian otters in Morocco. Most available data comes from isolated observations rather than long-term studies, as shown before in my presentation. We lack accurate population estimates, distribution models, and ecological studies. This makes it difficult to fully understand the status of the species and to develop effective conservation strategies. More field work and systematic monitoring are clearly needed. And this is exactly what makes these populations so important to study. These populations are located at the southernmost edge of the species range. They may show unique adaptation to more extreme environments. Studying them can help us better understand the limits of the species ecology and how it might respond to environmental changes. So, after looking at the distribution, behavior, and these different observations, we can see that the Eurasian otter in Morocco is not only present in suitable habitats, but it is also capable of adapting to challenging and changing environments, like the observation from Gulmim and Rashidiyya. They are both from arid regions semi-desertic areas, and plus, at the same time, our understanding of this population is still incomplete. And this highlights both the adaptability of the species and the need for more research and conservation efforts. And that's my presentation. It is very short, but I hope you liked it. And thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Issa. That was fascinating and interesting to hear about the issues that you have in Morocco. This morning, I'm not sure if you were there this morning, but we had Graham Roberts, who is with us this afternoon as an attendee. He has been doing work in the Greek islands, and one of the things he mentioned was that climate change was becoming a big issue for watercourses, and that watercourses were drying out quite a lot. Is that something similar? You mentioned a few times that there's obviously a lot of desert and arid areas in Morocco. Are you finding that wetlands are drying out more often?
Yeah, from the past years, the wetlands in Morocco were drying very fast. But this year, we had a very wet year. Like a lot of rain has poured here in Morocco, so the habitat is restoring.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good to know, and it's brilliant to hear a little reverse on what we hear a lot of in terms of the trends. If anyone has any questions for Issa, please feel free to use the boxes. Someone did comment that they thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, Issa, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Obviously, one important factor with conservation of any animal is working with communities. And do you find that when you're working and researching, do you engage with communities and do you find that they like otters? Or I know you mentioned about the conflict potentially with the mongoose, but do you ever find that they actually don't like the otters themselves?
No, they don't. They don't know the otters. They always misidentified with the mongoose.
Okay.
I asked plenty of people early, saying like young people, they don't know we have otters in Morocco. They say this animal lives only in Europe, America, Asia.
Yeah, yeah. Andreas is asking, how high do they go up into the mountains, meter above sea level, if you know that?
Yeah, from my own observations, I had only one record that's about 1,050 meters above the sea level.
Oh, still very high.
Here in the north.
Yeah. Would that be kind of the Atlas Mountains? Is that
No, the Reef Mountains,
the
the
Reef Mountains?
highest mountain in the north.
Oh, brilliant. Swanan Patil has a few questions. He
Yeah.
said, have you looked at scats? If so, the drying wetlands, are you seeing any shift in diet variations? And are you seeing any otter interaction with other animals?
Uh, I didn't hear the question. What is the question? I didn't hear it well.
Sorry, if have you looked at the scats and sprint, and are you seeing any difference in diet?
Yeah, a different samples of sprints. You can see bones, fish bones, animal bones, and sometimes I found crabs
Yeah,
and also feathers of birds. I still don't know how to see which animals it is from, but I can see the difference between the sprints.
yeah. And do you see any interactions between the otters and any other species, or
No, for
no?
now I still didn't see any interaction with any other animal. The only problem is with the mongoose.
Yeah.
That's
And Trevor, our previous speaker, he asked if is there any dietary overlap between the otters and the mongoose?
I don't think so. Only is there maybe the birds, water birds.
Oh, okay.
Some on one of my own field surveys, a person told me that the otters came to their fence, their poultry, and they hunt their poultry by eating the head and the internals. But I wasn't sure if it was the mongoose or the otter.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Andreas has asked, do you have any contact with other otter workers in neighboring countries like Tunisia and Algeria?
Yeah, I have contact with them, especially Tunisia with Rose Kilani.
Oh yeah.
She was in the Eurasian Otter conference.
Yes, that's correct.
As
Yeah,
I remember.
brilliant.
Yeah,
Well, Issa, thank you so much for your time.
you're welcome.
Again, if anyone has any further questions, we can ask Issa at the end. But for now, again, thank you so much. And
Thank
I
you.
will
Welcome.
hand to our next speaker, who is Marcelo Augusto. I'll give a brief introduction into Marcelo. Marcelo Augusto is going to talk, or he's created a video, so thanks for that, on the study of the behavior, habitat, and niche of the neotropical otter individuals on Santa Catarina Island, Florianópolis, Brazil. Hopefully I pronounced that okay. So Marcelo is a wildlife photographer, tour guide and agronomy student at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Florianópolis, Brazil. He is a member of both the Applied Ecology Laboratory and the Forest Restoration and Ecology Laboratory, where his work focuses on biodiversity conservation on Santa Catarina Island. Passionate about the neotropical otter, Marcel's undergraduate research explores the species diet and ecological niche through excrement analysis, photographic records, citizen science, and field observations across 3 ecosystems on Santa Catarina Island. His work aims to deepen understanding of the fascinating species and support its conservation in Florianópolis. Marcelo, I will share your video and then we can have a little chat about it. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcelo from Florianópolis, Brazil. I'm a wildlife photographer, tour guide, and a passionate researcher of the neotropical otter. I'm really happy to have been invited to talk on the World Otter Day webinar about my undergraduate research thesis at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, entitled Study of the Behavior, Habitat and Niche of Neotropical Otter Individuals on Santa Catarina Island, Florianópolis, Brazil. Since my English speaking skills are low, I opted to make a video with AI-generated narration to ensure that you, the listeners, could better understand what I have to say. However, all the speak, text, images, videos, data, maps, graphs and tables are my own work, the result of a long process done with a great care and dedication. I hope you all enjoy it.
The neotropical otter is a carnivorous mustelid with solitary and shy habits, highly adapted to aquatic life. Being highly dependent on environments such as rivers, streams, lakes, lagoons, estuaries, mangroves, forests, marshes, swamps, beaches, rocky shores, and continental islands. The scientific name, Lontra longicaudis, alludes to its long tail, which comprises about 1/3 of its body length, varying between 1.2 and 1.7 meters in total length and weighing on average between 5 kilograms and 15 kilograms. It is one of 2 otter species found in Brazil, and currently the only one in the southern part of the country. It is listed as near threatened on the IUCN Red List. In Brazil, the species is listed by ICM Bio as least concern in a general context, and as vulnerable in the Atlantic forest biome, the domain in which Florianópolis is located. In the municipality, factors such as disordered urban growth aggravated by real estate speculation, inadequate basic sanitation, water pollution, negative interactions with fishing gear and overfishing, mass tourism, disregard for management plans of conservation units, interaction with garbage, as in the image, among others, are potential threats to the species. Otters play an important role in controlling the population of their prey, possibly being the largest wild terrestrial mammal within the study area. Their diet consists mainly of fish and crustaceans, with opportunistic predation of amphibians, birds, insects, mammals, mollusks, and reptiles. Some studies also suggest that otters may occasionally feed on fruit. My research is being developed based on the collection of direct data, sightings, and indirect data, feces, footprints, other traces, complemented by citizen science through a sighting report form and records published on the iNaturalist platform. Spraints are collected in 3 ecosystems. Lagoon, represented by Lagoa do Peri, the largest freshwater lagoon on the coast of the state of Santa Catarina. Mangrove, samples are collected along a stretch where the freshwater of the Cuencas Antonio and Sangraduro rivers meets the saltwater of the Atlantic Ocean, giving rise to small mangrove patches and transition zones. And rocky shores, samples are collected in 3 distinct locations, with geological structures consisting predominantly of granitic and pyroclastic rocks intruded by basic and rhyolite dikes. These locations are Lagoina do Leste, Pantano do Sul and Saquinho. In these areas, 7 research sections were established and 15 spraint sites were identified, 5 in lagoons, 2 in mangroves, and 8 on rocky shores, as shown on the map. It should be noted that the research and spraint collection were authorized by the Municipal Environmental Foundation of Florianópolis, through authorization number 024/2025 DEPUC, a document that I have in my hands in the image. The spraints are collected from a rocky substrate, placed individually in 80 ml universal collection containers, and subsequently stored under refrigeration. In the laboratory, spraint is sorted and washed in running water through a 1 mm mesh sieve to obtain only the undigested residual material such as otoliths, scales and fish bones. Parts of crustacean exoskeletons. Shells of gastropod and bivalve mollusks. Otter fur, parts of algae, corals and other aquatic organisms. The analyses are performed manually with the aid of a stethoscope microscope due to the small size of most of the traces. To date, 65 droppings have been analyzed, totaling a sampling effort of 53 hours and 86 kilometers, of which 15 kilometers were covered within the sampling areas. Of these droppings, 39 represent rocky shores, 22 lagoons, and 4 mangroves. For the rocky shore and mangrove ecosystems, the categories fish and crustaceans were shown to be the main food items, followed by mollusks. In the lagoon ecosystem, the spraints analyzed showed only traces of fish in its composition. The fish category proved to be predominant, being present in 100% of the samples analyzed. No traces of birds, mammals, or reptiles were found. It is important to emphasize that the number of spraints analyzed, especially for the mangrove ecosystem, is still small, resulting in data that may not reflect the reality of the location. The goal is to conduct by the end of the study a sampling effort of 30 linear kilometers within the collection areas, 10 kilometers for each ecosystem, aiming to obtain a larger number of spraints and consequently a more accurate sample. During field expeditions, 4 sightings of neotropical otters occurred, adding to 9 others made by the author before the research, between 2024 and 2025. 17 sighting reports were obtained through citizen science, 15 through a form disseminated on social media, and 2 through the iNaturalist platform. In total, 30 sighting reports were counted, of which 18 were within the study area, in addition to 3 excrement sites identified on other occasions by the author outside the collection areas. Of the total sightings, 76.7% occurred in protected areas, called conservation units in Brazil, and the remainder in urban areas. The units where the sightings occurred were Lagoa do Peri Municipal Natural Monument, Rio Vermelho State Park, Lagoina do Leste Municipal Natural Park, Carajós Ecological Station, and Lagoa da Conceição Dunes Municipal Natural Park, although the species occurrence had not yet been formally listed in the last 2. In the study area, 89% of sightings occurred in the morning, while the remainder occurred in the afternoon. The fact that fewer people frequent natural environments at night, as well as the more limited visibility, may be the reasons why no sightings were reported during that time of day. Of these sightings, 72% were of solitary individuals, 17% of 2 individuals, and 11% of 3 individuals. Feeding behaviors were recorded on 6 occasions, 2 by the author and 4 through the citizen science protocol. Only on 2 of these occasions was it possible to identify the preyed taxon, Coptodon rendali in the Peri Lagoon and Chirina moscata in Ratones, north of Santa Catarina Island, possibly the first record of predation of a domestic bird by a neotropical otter in the municipality. Birds of the species Aramides cajaneus, Ardea alba, Egretta thula, Larus dominicanus, and Megaceral were cited in 5 separate episodes near L. longicaudis, without the otter showing any negative reaction to their presence. On one of these occasions, recorded on video, a seagull deliberately approached an otter to feed on the remains of fish it had caught. These observations may serve as evidence that otter predation on birds in the study area may be more sporadic than previously thought, to the point that some birds do not perceive the species as a potential predator. Regarding the taxa preyed upon by L. longicaudis in the study area, to date 9 species belonging to 7 families, 7 orders, 4 classes and 3 distinct phyla have been identified. It should be noted that some prey of L. longicaudis may be disregarded in this study because they do not have hard parts that can withstand passage through the otter's digestive tract and are therefore absent from the excrement analyzed. The research proved relevant, having already enabled the identification of taxa not yet described as prey of Lontra longicaudis in Florianópolis, as well as its presence in conservation units for which they had not yet been formally listed. The studies will continue until November of this year, when the author will defend his final thesis. During this period, priorities will include increasing the number of samples collected, increasing the number of sighting reports, and identifying other taxa preyed upon by L. longicaudis through meticulous analysis of a large quantity of sorted but not yet identified food remains. With the continuation of the research, it is hoped that the results obtained will contribute to protecting and improving knowledge about the ecology of this enchanting species in the study area and its surroundings.
Marcelo, thank you so much for your video. I hope everyone got to see it. We had a few issues this morning with the video, and I'm hoping it was a little bit better this afternoon. Sonia Maria Rafa said, "Congrats, Marcelo. I liked your presentation and admire your dedication. It's great to see the work you're doing on possibly a lesser studied species in Brazil. We obviously, you mentioned the giant otter. It's quite famous and quite well known, and the neotropical otter less so. Have you compared what you found so far to other areas in Brazil, and have you managed to see any sort of relation to that?"
Sorry, I don't understand what you say.
No.
Maybe can you write in the chat?
Yeah, no problem. There you go.
Yes. I read another studies on the south of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, and the composition of the diet of others is very similar what I found on my study areas. But in other parts of Brazil, like the north of Brazil, Amazonia, it is a little different because have more fish than on salt, because we have cliffs, rock cliffs, and on rock cliffs have more crabs and mollusks. So I see that difference from my area from another parts of Brazil.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's another question if it's easier for you just to read.
I think it's a great idea. Maybe in the future, because I want to still student others in my future graduations, like in more time. And yes, is a good idea. And I think I have similar studies on Florianópolis because we have a big project in Florianópolis called Otter Project. And I think in the past time, studies like this with DNA are making to know how big is the population of others in Lagoa do Peri.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question for you. Is this part of your master's thesis or a bigger project?
Is my master thesis from graduation.
Yeah. Well, Marcelo, thank you so much. Thank you for your video and the work you're doing. Any other questions, please put in the chat box. Oh, there is one more question for you.
Mhm. No. Every sprite I find have more fish trace than crabs. In past time, but before my research start, I find the only sprint with our of sprint at crab, but just one time. In the
Oh, really?
rest of sprint, I have more fish than crabs and another trace of
Oh,
another species.
amazing. Well, thank you so much. Good luck with the rest of your project, and we'll definitely be in touch and stay in contact. And any other
Thank you.
questions, please ask, and we'll ask at the end. Thank you, Marcelo. Very appreciated.
Thank you too.
Just to say that Trevor is going to have to leave in a few minutes, and if anyone wants to get in touch about African otters or have any questions, then please feel free to drop him an email, which he's left. Trevor, from myself and the rest of IOSF, and hopefully, and I think all the attendees will agree. Thank you so much for your fascinating presentation, and enjoy the rest of your World Otter Day. Thank you. We will now pass over to our fourth and final speaker, who is Gonzalo Medina Vogel, who will be talking on and saving the southern river otter, the next steps in Chile. I will give a brief introduction to Gonzalo and then I will pass over. So, from veterinary medicine to the front lines of conservation, Gonzalo has dedicated his career to understanding and protecting wildlife and ecosystems. With a PhD in wildlife ecology and a foundation in veterinary science, his journey has bridged science, policy, and education, founding academic programs, advising on national conservation strategies, and mentoring the next generation of conservation leaders. His work spans aquatic and terrestrial carnivores, cetaceans, seabirds, bats, and the human dimensions of conservation, always with a focus on restoring balance between people and nature. Co-founder of the Latin American Association of Wildlife Veterinarians, former dean at Universidad Andrés Bello, and now part of the One Health Institute, he continues to shape how we approach conservation in a changing world. In 2025, he was recognized internationally as IUCN Otter Specialist Group Coordinator for Lontra felina and Lontra provocax, and honoured with the IOSF Otter Oscars Special Award for his outstanding career of more than 40 years devoted to otter conservation. Driven by science, guided by purpose, and committed to protecting life in all its forms. Thank you, Gonzalo.
Thank you, Ben. Are you listening well, the volume?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can see your screen as well. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thanks for the invitation. I'm very proud to be here in part of all this Otter Day and speaking in this moment. I will go through a very short 40-year history presentation about southern river otter as the guardian for the Patagonian wetlands. Move this or not move this? One moment. What happened? It's not going. Let me try again.
No problem.
Why this not moving? Okay. Again. Okay.
It's just loading. Yeah, I can see that now.
No. It's-
If you just give it a few seconds, it should load. There you go.
Okay, now working.
Yeah, you just
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Back to 1990s, this otter was known as a relatively small river otter, less than 8 kilogram body weight and less than 1 meter long. But after few research doing a riot tracking research where we have to trap some of the species of the individuals, we realized that the otter was quite larger, and now we understand it's an otter less than 50 kilogram of body weight and up to 1.5 meters long. And most probably it is the most threatened otter in the world, close to a bottleneck situation, and maybe it's the one with a smaller freshwater distribution of the 14 species we have in the world. For example, this photo you see in the bottom of this slide were the first photos of live southern river otter that were taken between 2000 and 2004. So it's a relatively new known otter. The first studies back to the beginning of the 19 was to understand what the otter actually was eating in freshwater ecosystem, and this graph showed one of the first studies we did comparing the diet of the otter between lakes and rivers, and definitely was an otter that concentrated the diet on crustacean, macro crustaceans, and secondary on fish, with some variation between seasons. And you see these two species of crayfish were the most common in the diet. After a long survey done in Chile and Argentina between the beginning of the 80s and the 90s, we conclude that the species declined to less than 10% of the original distribution of the population. You see here in this map, the distribution in freshwater habitat declined after 1880, and the distribution in the marine environment that is very little known. In fact, there is only 3 scientific papers about the distribution and ecology of this species in marine habitats. So very little. What happened? Why was this big decline of the species? We have to understand the ecology. First, we did a research about the importance of this swamp forest ecosystem. This is like a mangrove, freshwater mangrove we have in Chile. And as you see here, in these areas, the species had a much diversified food, or predate over much more prey than in comparison with the first study on Andes, lakes, and rivers. In the lowland, the Central Valley, this swamp forest close to the sea, the otter eat much more on fish, on amphibians that are much more rich on protein and calories. So these areas, for example, are used especially in dry season, where is the time of the otter breeding the young ones, raising the young ones. Well, so what happened in the past? In the past, there was a strong law, and it's still going on, this law on river dredging and canalization. To understand what impact has these activities, human activities on the otter habitat, we compare in a study between 2000 and 2003, we compare different sections of rivers that are natural, semi-natural, and those that are absolutely transformed by canalization and dredging. And you see here in the graph at the bottom left, the rivers that were less used by the otter were those that suffer canalization and river dredging. The next one were those same rivers that were canalized in the past, but the riparian vegetation came back, no? And these areas were significantly more used by otters. And the one that were absolutely used every month and in a higher quantity were those rivers and streams that were still natural or semi-natural. So this human activity, canalization and dredging, significantly affect the otter use of those habitats. The next question was about the structure of the valley cutting Chile from the west to the east. We have the Andes, higher mountains, so it's a very steep country. How this affected the otter distribution, and you see in this graph, the otter follow the distribution of the crustaceans. And concentrate below the 300 meters above sea level. And this is different with Argentina. In Argentina, most of the population are above 300 meters above sea level, but the difference is the steepness. So the steepness means that water flow very strong downhill, so crustacean cannot survive in this steepness rivers, and concentrate in the lowlands, in the valleys, and in this wetland or swamp forest where the otter also concentrate. So if you see the whole river, is not the whole river used by the otters, only those lowland areas with slow-moving waters where the scribefish is the main habitat of the scribefish. So this is the habitat of southern river otter. It's a riparian vegetation. It's a natural corridor, biological corridor with riparian vegetation, swamp forest, no, that has been historically affected because this habitat is also very good for agriculture, no. So suffer a lot of land use change in the last 300, 400 years. But how much habitat? Well, we ran this riot tracking research between 2000 and 2006. We were the first country out of Europe and United States that riot track otters. And we came to the conclusion that these otters have a very large home range, 22 kilometers long of river lines, no, with average 10 kilometers, and they have a intersexual territorial behavior. So the density was 1 otter per 10 kilometers, 1 male, 1.5 female per 10 kilometers, so very low density. And if you think about this study about the landscape, the habitat available for the otters only the lowland and the close to the sea areas, which is not the whole river basin or river watershed. And last year, we have this lucky situation that we managed to take a photo of the same otter, as you see in this right here of a cut, no? And we took this photo in a lake in the Chile Island, and 6 months after that, we found a photo of the same individual in Instagram, and we measure the possible routes that this otter could have taken between these 6 months, and it's a dispersion of 150 to 160 kilometers. And if you see the map, the only dispersion route is outside the national protected area of the Chile Island. So it's a species that most in this island and in the rest of the country inhabit areas outside national parks and have a very, very long dispersion pattern, very, very, very big. So we have to think on huge area to protect this species. What happened with this habitat in the past in Chile? The map you see in the left side were these swamp forest wetland areas, the best habitat for the species in the central north, central south of Chile. No? And what happened in the past with this ecosystem was transformed. This habitat was less than 30%, 40%, 14% of the forest type habitat we have in Chile in the past. No, so was little habitat available for the species originally little. And what happened with this habitat was very rich for agriculture. Well, start changing from riparian forest, from wetland forest to the rivers were channelized, where the wetland were drained out, and was transformed to agriculture, and then from agriculture from farming to pinus and eucalyptus plantation. It's happened all along central south of Chile, as you see here. And this is the history. This is the history, the recent history. This started 200 years ago. How changes the whole landscape. What you see in red color is the pinus and eucalyptus plantations. How invade the invasion of this industry of the southern river habitat. In the right side are the forests of the Andes Mountains, where this not habitat for the otters, and in the central is the yellow, the Central Valley, and in the left side, where it's full red, is the better where the swamp forests were in the past and was the best habitat of the otter. So the declination, the extinction of the otter follow these land use changes. What we did? Well, we transformed rivers, rich wetlands into tubes, into related channels with high variation in water level between winter and summer. And this also is not good for crustacean. It's not good for native small fish, because the water rise the temperature in the summer. There's less water, less oxygen. There's not more refuges. So the current capacity of this ecosystem dropped significantly, and was not good anymore for the otters. This is the history, what we did. The river slope is the first limited factor, then the channel structure, the torrent speed, the substrate, the bed of the rivers, the woody debris, and then this is the habitat for the crustacean, amphibians, small fish, and then it's the habitat for southern river otter. And what we do with the machineries and the forestry companies was transform all the system into tubes, into really low carrying capacity ecosystem that were not good for crustacean, for amphibian, for small fish, and also for southern river otter. So we actually destroyed an ecosystem with the whole trophic chain, you see. Well, these are also, the poaching was important until 1990. This photo was taken by me in the beginning of the 19th. So poaching was still going on until those years. Now it's not very important. Most important is the habitat destruction and transformation. This is what we have now. It's a little habitat available for the species remain in the south of the continental area of Chile and the Chiloé Island, and the immediately part in Argentina, and then down south is the marine area where we have this marine population. But we have some knowledge, but not good enough. We need to study more about this species in marine habitat. So if we map the observation we found in social networks, every pictures, every observation of the otter, and the scientific records of the species are practically 90%, 95% outside protected areas, national park, or private or national parks. So the species is not protected by the national park network or private protected areas network too. So we have to think on people attitude, people knowledge, how to coexist the species with the people. But we have other threats like invasive American mink, as in Europe. If we think on competition, there is not exploitation competition between two species, and if there is some competition, will be in favor of the otter, of the southern river otter. If we compare the southern river otter with the mink, the one that changed behavior, changed diet in the presence of the otter is the mink, not the otter. However, when we put in this scenario the domestic dog, we have a huge free wandering population of domestic dog, more than 1 million, yeah. And we put in this scenario the disease that this dog can carry to otters through the mink as a breech wasp. We got these results. What happened? There is a relation between the seroprevalence of distemper and parvovirus in dogs, in minks, and in otters. No, and it's have to do with denso dependence and frequency dependence epidemiology, no models. We know that distemper and parvovirus are very nastily for otters. So most probably what is going on here is a scenario of apparent competition, where the mink is invading the area with a biological weapon, which are this parvovirus obtained from wandering dogs. And if we put a camera trap and we see the results, there's an absolutely overlap of those otter sprinting size with dogs and mink. So parvovirus and distemper live in the environment. Parvovirus can live more than 1, 2, 3 days, distemper a couple of hours, but those times are when an otter is visiting the latrine after a dog or a mink. The times in between those visits are good enough for transmission of this virus. What happened with other parasites like toxoplasmosis within an otter that is in a close to bottleneck situation? Toxoplasmosis is a parasite that promote and affect the immunal system and the neurological system of the species. We know what happened with sea otter in California, in North America. Well, we record seroprevalence of toxoplasmosis in southern river otters, and we see all the studies are above 60% seroprevalence. This is very high. In some areas are 100%. So each individual we test is positive to toxoplasmosis. So this means there is a huge parasite pollution of the ecosystem. No, we are not very sure about the responsibility of domestic cat in this, but the result is that the habitat of the species is in this moment very affected by very high with the pollution of these parasites. If we study the diet, we compare the diet between the otter, the mink, and the cat. The otter is eating in a higher trophic level. It's eating a predator, no? And what predator can be in this habitat? In Chile, the only possible is to introduce a salmon, the Chinook one. It's the only possibility. And if we record the seroprevalence of mink that also eat these salmons, we come to the conclusion that the salmons are getting the parasite from the water, from the pollution, the water pollution of this parasite, and then the otters is eating the salmons and maybe also the crustacean and getting the parasite in their bodies. Also, the salmon farms are also, they have another effect on the otters. We have a 100% overlap of the salmon farming with the otters distribution, and we record an increasing and a significant increase in interaction between the otters and the salmon farm, and in some time the result of the dead otters. This picture are 2 different dead otters found in facilities inside salmon farming. So salmon farm. So here there's a problem that we need to study more, but it's very difficult. Now it's very difficult to get into salmon farms. They are very closed. They don't want to any study that can affect their business. So it's not easy. It's not easy environment to understand what is going on here. Other thing we're having is otter vehicle collection. The thing is very similar to one happening in Europe. Some otters they don't like to cross these tubes, this type of draining tube underneath the highways, and so the otter walk around and cross the road from above, where they get killed. And we find that this other kind of bridge, the beam type of bridge, are safe passage for otters. So we are promoting this type of bridge in Chile and trying to stop the building of this type of draining tube underneath the road that actually are bad for the species. And we have been having every year some records of otter vehicle collision, and also is related to rainfall. So in the days that get more rain, more currents in these tubes, the otters really don't use them and they cross the roads underneath. So this is the problem of southern river otter. We got a longitudinal problem. No, it's along the whole system. Then a lateral one where it's different situation, how we remove the vegetation, salinization, the floodplain drainage, agriculture, housing. Also, we got the vertical one that affect the water body, pollution, invasive species, alien invasive species that we have to. So we are understanding very well what is going on with the problem with the southern river otter, and we have the picture what we have to change to protect the species. We know some genetic, so this is the next step. The next step to save the species is population reinforcement. So we need to study the genetic structure of the species along the marine area, the freshwater area, to build a strategy of translocation, reintroduction, working with the people, promoting these people-otter coexistence, stop the draining, stop the forest timber logging plantation, restore the habitat, and select sites to do translocation for otter reinforcement, genetic reinforcement, to promote a higher diversity in their genetic, because we know that we are close to a bottleneck situation. So do this. This is the next step. Hope so. You understand. And well, if you are very interested in this species and the history, in these 40 years of research, in August this book will come out. 340 pages of southern river otter ecology, veterinarians, human attitude, veterinarian management, manipulation, surgery, anesthetic, disease, ecology, and what is the importance of long-term research on the conservation of the species. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you, Gonzalo. Fascinating presentation and really well put in terms of everything that's happened with Southern River Otter, particularly in Chile. There are a few questions. I was just wondering, I know that you do work with Lontra felina as well. Are you finding the same disease transmission issues with the dog and mink into the felina as well as the provocax?
Yes, we're finding the same.
Yeah.
The important thing is that what we found was that the parvovirus that is affecting Phylana is not the same that is affecting the Lontra provocax, but both viruses are in mink and in dogs.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Graham Roberts has asked, is there a lot of privately owned land in Chile in proportion to state-owned?
Again, please.
Is there a lot of privately owned land in Chile in proportion to the state-owned land?
Yeah, a lot, much more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A question I have is, you mentioned about the Andes basically being a factor in the distribution. Is there a fragmentation between Chilean populations of provocax and Argentinian populations because of the Andes?
Yes, there is haplotypes in the Argentina population that we don't have in Chile, and vice versa. No? Yeah. There must be some communication with this population, but very low. So it's low enough to have these differences in haplotypes between the Argentinian and the Chilean ones. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Elsa has asked, are there any actions being currently led to facilitate human otter coexistence in Chile, specifically regarding the salmon farms?
Well, in the last years, there have been an increasing interest in popular interest in the species. No, so if we compare in the 10 years now, every day we have some pictures of the otter in the web. There is increasing interest in the conservation of the species. There is increasing interest in the government agencies in the conservation of the species. We have a conservation program in the country. Well, without funding, but we have. So there is increasing interest in people, but not in the big companies, not in the timber logging companies, not in the salmon farms, not in the one that are building dams. We have to orientate our work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Swanan Patel has said you have almost 3 to 4 different types of landscapes within the country, meaning agricultural, forest, and urban. Is there any abundance difference, like otters preferring agriculture areas more than others, or something like that?
No, the importance here are the riparian forest and the swamp forest. If those are surrounded by agricultural land, you will find otters there. But if these areas are being canalized or drained, you will not find the otters. So there is areas, for example, that are running through pinus and eucalyptus forest, but got good riparian vegetation. This company didn't touch the swamp forest, so you still find otters over there. In areas where all the watershed are still natural, like in Chiloé Island, you find really high density of the species. So at the end, all this activity affect the carrying capacity of the system. Even if you find the swamp forest, but are surrounded by logging companies, you get lower carrying capacity.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Lottie has said, thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. How is the government and local people looking at the species? How do you involve them in your research work and convince them that it is an important species?
The government got a service, a biodiversity service, and also the fishing bureau. The people working in there are very interested in the conservation of the species. But Chile is the most neoliberalism country in the world. So there is not much regulatory laws. So everybody behave according to these regulatory laws. And we don't have really strange law to go against this activity. For example, the road building. We don't have a law that will for example force to build beam type of bridges instead of this draining type. You see, we cannot have, because of this neoliberalist type of no regulatory, everything have to be voluntary. So it was difficult. Yeah.
Absolutely. If anyone has any questions for any of the speakers, obviously Trevor has had to leave, but if there's any questions for Gonzalo or Issa or Marcelo, please feel free to ask them.
I have a question for Issa.
Yeah, Issa?
Issa, you show a picture of a lake. Is this a natural lake or is a reservoir, an artificial reservoir?
It's a dam built circulates water. Yeah. It is actually it's positive for otters. The fish population has decreased a lot since dams started to be built in Morocco.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
Well, it doesn't look like any of the attendees have any further questions. If you do, please feel free to put them in. In the meantime, I just want to say a massive thank you to Gonzalo, a massive thank you to Issa, to Marcelo, and to Trevor for your expertise, your time, and for coming here today and presenting on your 4 different species and the different work you're doing, all of which is really important to the ongoing conservation work for your respective species. There is a couple more questions come in. Elsa's asked for yourself, Marcelo, when you're sampling otter feces, how are you sure that they actually come from otters and not other carnivorous animals in the area?
Okay. On Florianópolis, we don't have more big carnivorous animals species. We have just others. Is the most big predator we have, and is really easy to find and to know. It's other same feces because have a smell of fish, very it's easy to find for the smell, and the form of feces is very very representative. Don't have any other feces similar from the others on Florianópolis.
Yeah, that makes sense. Stefan, thank you all very much for your presentations. That was my first World Otter Day attendance. I enjoyed the talks a lot, and it helps me learn about my favourite animal and its preservation. I live in Scotland, just like myself, Stephen. I want to learn more about how to help with projects, but my time is limited due to full-time job. Totally understandable. Stephen, Stefan, sorry, I don't know exactly which one. I'm assuming Stefan, but feel free to give me an email and we can have a wee chat about potentially how you can help. Again, going back to, I just want to say a massive thank you again to Trevor, to Marcelo, to Gonzalo, and to Issa for their attendance today, for taking the time to produce their presentations, and then come here today. And I'm sure the attendees will echo my sentiments in saying a massive thank you, not only for telling us about your work, but for conducting your work in the first place. For me, we're coming to the end of my World Otter Day. For Gonzalo and Marcelo, you will be somewhere midway through it. So I will end the webinar at this point, saying again a massive thank you to the speakers, to the attendees, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your World Otter Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.